And so at some point during the midst of kind of wandering around this creation that I knew intuitively that I had brought into existence, but yet still was kind of marveling at the complexity and the beauty of, I felt my arm being taken very gently by someone who I looked over, and they had kind of like a uniform with like a little energy language logo. And it was a young man who essentially worked at the park, who was kind of like a chaperone / media facilitator, or I don't know what his title would have been. But his job was to kind of wander around and answer questions that people might have, or to facilitate the actual the examples. And, you know, like, well, you pull this lever and you can see what sun does when it photosynthesizes leaves or whatever. And at some point he took my arm, and I realized that, wow, he must see me as being old enough where I might need some assistance getting like over this next little ridge or something, so I can, you know. And he asked me very politely, in a language that I somehow knew, but it wasn't English, if in fact I was doing okay and if I had any questions. And I was caught between the two motivations. One thing that I wanted to do was like point out, like, you know, my kind of the egoist sort of, like, I was like, well, I'm doing okay there, Sonny. You know, I built this thing, and as you know, because he obviously didn't recognize me as the person who had created it. But then on the other hand, I was like, wow, like, this is so fascinating that this has actually been brought into fruition through an idea that started very innocently in 1996 in Madrid, Spain, but has expounded upon itself so dramatically and in such amazing ways that now it's this new thing that can be experienced for free by potentially millions of people. And it actually has proven itself to be a valuable tool for the abstract expression of human consciousness, just by the fact that I'm having this conversation with this guy in the language, which is much more efficient than any that had been before it, and able just to think interesting thoughts that perhaps wouldn't be able to be thought before. And I ended up stopping myself by kind of saying, no, thank you, son, but appreciate, you know, appreciate the heads up, but I'm doing okay. And he wandered off to some other group to, you know, help them to figure out some sort of, I don't know, photovoltaic meter or something like that. But that was the sort of thing, and that's the only one that I remember offhand, but that's the sort of experience that I ended up seeing was, and then that was just a future one. That was one that was, I knew that at some point it was in the future because I was kind of hobbling about. But there were also ones that involved conversations with people. It was unclear whether it was the past or the future, but just conversations wherein various things that had been misunderstood between us suddenly became a little bit more clear, or conversations with past lovers or friends or acquaintances, some of which are no longer with us, about the nature of what happens when, you know, and again, I wish I could. I probably should have tried to write it down, though I probably would. The idea of writing something down when you're on ayahuasca is probably totally asinine. Though I remember, as I would be struggling to try to remember, like, wow, that was really brilliant, I wish I could somehow record that, then suddenly another interlude would happen that was so dramatically different from the first one, and so markedly different in its kind of feeling and texture that I would just completely forget and then go on to the next one. And it was like that for probably between 10 or 11 at night and almost dawn. There was, and it lessened, and the intensity of the vision started to lessen. There was gradually the recollection that I had in fact not slept at all, and that I was kind of moving around and still on a fairly uncomfortable futon. Maybe I had a couple of mosquito bites that I started to get concerned about because we were in an area that had malaria in it. So then gradually the real world per se started to kind of bring itself back in on me, not in a way that was oppressive or that was disjointed or that was unhappy, but just in a way that it was kind of, okay, now it's time to kind of re-vibrate in a different way, the way that you normally vibrate. But then it's kind of hard to describe, but it was almost as though the vibrations were nothing like they were before I had had the experience, which is, I think, what ayahuasca can do. It can be truly transformative in the sense that it's not an escape as much as it is just a reconfiguration of the boundaries of reality, and how those boundaries are not set in stone, so to speak. They're malleable and can be tinkered with and should be tinkered with for those that are interested at all in just probing the nature of reality or how profound reality can be.